So Taylor gives her mirror self the plan. There's a natural gas pipeline that runs about a half a mile away from one of the walls of the Yeerk pool. She wants the Andalite bandits to morph Taxon and burrow a tunnel between the pipe and the pool. Holding the Yeerk pool hostage, Taylor's faction could start making demands, force Visor 3 out of power, and kickstart this whole democracy thing. It's a solid plan, all told, but then Taylor has a bit of a freak-out. But then, suddenly, her face transformed. All at once, her blue eyes filled with desperation. Her pink lips parted with wordless horror. A different voice, a frightened, abused little voice, called across the table in a toneless whisper. "Don't listen," it said. "Don't listen to her." I sat transfixed as Taylor's hand blazed across the tabletop, crashing into her latte, smashing the mug to the floor. There was a huge racket as ceramic clattered across tile. Yeah, remember when I said that Taylor was the poster child of a symbiotic host-Yeerk relationship? That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Apparently the Yeerk is doing something so fucked up that the human is breaking free of their merged insane ego and is trying to warn people. This is pretty much the definition of a red flag. Taylor manages to recompose herself and the meeting ends. The Animorphs regroup at the mall to talk it over. They know they can't trust Taylor, and this Yeerk democracy thing is probably a load of bull. But if this pipeline is real and they have a real chance of destroying the Yeerk pool, they should definitely check it out. There is one objection to that. No one said anything. Silent agreement. Except for Cassie. Her eyes got wide. She began to stand up. "None of you guys are really thinking about this," she said in a voice that made a couple of older kids sitting at the table next to ours look up. "Shh." "No," she said. "It's wrong. I won't. I don't want to judge you guys, but you're talking about strategy and risk like this is some computer game. Like there aren't others involved. Have you forgotten that we're supposed to be in this to save lives?" And she goes on like that, talking about the collateral damage, the innocent host and Yeerk lives that will be lost if the Yeerk pool was to collapse on itself. And yeah, that's pretty shitty. But that's the unfortunate place the Yeerk invasion has put you in. Every time you fight a Yeerk, you're hurting and killing an innocent host. And sometimes the Yeerk itself isn't entirely culpable for its actions. Every action you take against the Yeerks hurts an innocent life. You have to have realized this by now. "You make an interesting argument," Axe said through a mouthful of nachos, "but there are a lot of inconsistencies between what you say and what you do." He swallowed noisily. "How can you make this argument knowing what you've done in the past?" "That's different," Cassie responded forcefully. "I'm not against defending myself and you guys. I hate violence, but self-defense is justified in all societies, unlike murdering people." Self-defense? Self-defense? You have spent the last 2.5 years hitting military targets, and you're calling it self-defense when you find armed forces there? The Yeerks are not knocking down your door and attacking you without provocation. You are going to them! Do you have any fucking idea what self-defense even means, Cassie? And really, have you seriously spent all this time thinking that the Yeerk pool wasn't a primary target? It's the target. It's inexplicably the only Yeerk pool on the planet and the base of operations for the entire Yeerk invasion of Earth. And for some reason, you thought it was off limits? Why are you still here? Why are you still fighting this war when clearly you have no idea what's going on? You see, Cassie is a moron. Cassie decides she can't do it and bows out of the mission, which is fine. You're stupid and we don't like you. That evening, Axe and Tobias fly to the natural gas pump station, and while morphed Andalite, the two meet with Taylor and are thrown in a pit with a taxon to acquire. Taylor says she can't trust a taxon controller because a taxon's extreme hunger would make them easier to break into interrogation. They're forced to kill the taxon in the process, but the two get their morphs, and the Animorphs plan for action the next morning. They arrive at the pump station early to set up their own security, and Tobias morphs taxon. Then, all at once, I felt it coming. An unstoppable tidal wave riding up the shore. Insane hunger. Desperate, all-consuming hunger. Like nothing you can begin to imagine. It reared up, larger than any urge I have ever experienced, blocking out everything else. Everything. This would be a really cool moment, getting to know how the taxon mind functioned, getting to experience this hunger firsthand. It would be a cool moment if the Andalite Chronicles hadn't already done it years earlier, and in a much more satisfying and interesting way. This book actually contradicts the Andalite Chronicles by painting the taxons as complete slaves to their hunger, whereas the Andalite Chronicles carefully pointed out that taxons are actually capable of significant intelligence, and that the hunger doesn't override basic survival instincts like not attacking aliens with swords growing out of their butts. Morphing taxons is the centerpiece of this book. It's the cover morph and everything, but it's actually a slight step backwards in characterizing the species. It was long believed, though not confirmed, that there would eventually be a Taxon Chronicles that would probably follow Taxon Nothlit Arbon as he led a Taxon rebellion, but it never came to be. It certainly would have been more interesting and relevant than the Chronicles book we eventually did wind up with, but that's for a later review. Some have suggested, and I agree, that perhaps Arbon should have returned in this book, rather than the one he did. It would have given him more room in the series to breathe as a character, would have made the Taxon book more favorable to Taxons, and would have made this book more interesting because, truth be told, the second half of this book is kinda slow and dull. A solid chunk of this book is just Tobias and Axe trying to control their morphs so that they don't eat the rest of the team and don't go past 2 hours, with a bit of, can we really trust Taylor tension thrown in. BTW, the answer is, no, you can't trust her, and it's so bleeding obvious you just want to scream at the pages. So Tobias and Axe dig the tunnel, which consists of eating the dirt and shitting out ooze, while Taylor shit-talks Tobias from a corner. Eventually, Axe gets stuck in the tunnel, having gorged himself into a mud pie food coma, which is an oddly fitting fate for Axe. They coax him to demorph, and Tobias takes his turn, and eventually breaks through to the Yerk pool near the roof. Being this high makes Tobias flashback to the very first time he came here, when he hid from Visor 3 and got trapped as a hawk. This book is pretty much evidence 1A for the Tobias intentionally trapped himself theory. I looked back at the rock face, my Nothlit birthplace. I'd made a decision. Had I made a bad decision? I didn't know, and suddenly I realized that I would never know. I know that I stuck with my choice, and that I had followed it through to the very end. Taylor shows up, having gotten past the rest of the Animorphs, and starts giving Tobias the "join me, and we can rule the Yerks together" speech. Yeah, it's more clear than ever that she has no interest in democracy. When Tobias refuses, she punches him in the throat, and runs back up the tunnel. Tobias gives chase, finding the rest of the Animorphs paralyzed by her cyborg arm gas. Oh no, not that thing we knew she had! And then finding Taylor threatening to blow a hole in the pipeline, planning to blow the place sky high. Taylor's body would be destroyed, but the Yerk would survive inside an artificial skull. She breaks through the pipe, and high-pressured gas blows her and Tobias down the tunnel. Taylor blew right past me, propelled by the gas, a swirl of blonde hair and pink flesh. And she was laughing. And Taylor floats out of the Animorph series like dust in the wind. The rest of the Animorphs manage to brace themselves, and before they suffocate to death, the gas goes off. They recover, climb out of the tunnel, and check out the pump station, where they find a crying Cassie with half a dozen unconscious controllers around her. It turns out Cassie went straight to the Yerk peace movement to warn them, learning that they all go to the Yerk pool at the same time to exchange information, because constantly being in the same groups in public is the best way to hide your existence. That way, if one of you is found out, it's super easy to discover who you're associating with. No wonder Cassie works with these guys. They're clearly matched for intelligence. In fact, didn't the Animorphs themselves figure out not to do this, like, 2 books in? Visor 3 found the peace movement schedule and planned to use this gas explosion plot to destroy them and the Andalite bandits at the same time while pinning the blame on the peace movement. Yes, Visor 3, who I should remind you is under heavy scrutiny from the Council of 13 at this time, decided to blow up the central base of the Earth invasion just to take out 6 enemy combatants and a small group of hold hands and sing kumbaya activists. Did somebody hit the multi-ball combo on Idiot Pinball today? Taylor was still totally loyal and in cahoots with the Visor, but I guess decided midway through to aim bigger and try to take over the operation herself. I really don't understand. Cassie pieced it all together and turned the gas off and is now crying because she saved her friends and found a non-lethal way to deal with her enemies because everything about her is wired backwards. The book ends with Tobias and Rachel flying together, the disembodied Taylor voice now gone. Post-book follow-up. This book starts a lot stronger than it ends. I really like the opening with Tobias saving the kid. The opening battle with Tobias helpless in a cage is pretty exciting, and Tobias morphing Taylor was a neat turn of events, even if they could have done more with such a unique situation. By the time the Animorphs start digging the tunnel, however, the energy drops dangerously low. Actions get repetitive, and Taylor's ruse gets more and more obvious the more she's around. Then you got the Taxon stuff that contradicts earlier material, and for the first and I think only time, we have negative world building, where the Animorphs universe is a little less interesting than it was before. But perhaps most disappointing about this book is how insufficient it is as a sequel to number 33, The Illusion, and as a conclusion to Tobias' PTSD in regards to Taylor. He never really has that direct conflict with her that we were all expecting. And if anything, these events should have just thrown more wood onto the I'm traumatized fire. The book begins with Tobias not having power over his former torturer, and he never gains that power here. He spends most of the book working with her and doing what she tells him to do. I have to wonder if maybe there was originally a theme of Tobias becoming more and more like Taylor to deal with her presence. Might be why they even did the Tobias morphs Taylor stuff to begin with. It's a damn neat visual that you could only really do in Animorphs, but I'm still not entirely sure why it was a thing. You know what this book feels like? It feels like the second book in a trilogy that never got completed. If a third book had been written that properly ends the Taylor-Tobias storyline, I probably wouldn't be so hard on this book. But I guess the final arc kicked in and made that impossible. I don't know. Speaking of, this book isn't usually considered part of the final arc, but it sets up a lot of the stuff we'll be seeing in it, such as Visor 1's failure with Anati, and the Animorphs finally discussing the possibility of destroying the Yeerk pool, so it's still one of the must-reads for continuity's sake. And it's not bad, don't get me wrong. This is a decent, if unsatisfying book, and it's practically a godsend compared to the 2 books it's sandwiched between. I give number 43, The Test, a 7 out of 10.